All right, so we are diving into something that has really got a lot of people riled up online.
Oh, this is juicy.
It all started with this Reddit post that posed a pretty interesting question. Like, could a billionaire CEO, could they actually survive for a
Mm.
whole month living on their lowest paid employee's salary?
It's a question that, it really gets the wheels turning, doesn't it?
Yeah.
This whole concept of a reality show where we get to see a CEO stripped
Mhm.
of all their riches and then thrown into the world having to live on a, very small budget.
Exactly. And you should see some of these comments on this thread. They're wild. Some people are like, absolutely not. There's no way that a billionaire, I mean, they've lived such a different life. How could they even grasp what it means to actually struggle with money?
Yeah, and I think, you have to acknowledge that there's a good deal of skepticism there, and for good reason. I mean, a month, even under the most difficult circumstances, it just doesn't really compare to the reality of what poverty looks like
Hmm.
over a long period of time. And studies have shown that poverty has a cumulative effect. It impacts everything from, physical and mental health to decision making. It's not something you can just kind of briefly experience and truly understand.
Right. It's like some commenters were saying, for a billionaire, this would be like a camping trip.
Yeah.
Right. Uncomfortable for sure, maybe a little eye-opening, but at the end of the day, it's temporary.
Exactly. And they always have that safety net of knowing that their wealth is there waiting for them. I think that the psychological impact of poverty, that's something you can't just, replicate in a month. The stress, that constant kind of fear of the unknown.
Well, and speaking of stress, one of the things that really jumped out at me in this thread was how much people were talking about unexpected expenses. It's not just about like making your rent payment or getting groceries every week. It's about those sudden costs that can just totally throw your finances into a tailspin.
Oh, for sure. It's often not those everyday costs that push people into poverty, but it's those
Huh.
unexpected things, a medical emergency, your car suddenly breaks down, maybe a sudden increase in your rent. And actually, studies show that almost 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck with very little to no savings to help them when these financial shocks happen.
60%. Wow, that's a huge number. I mean,
Right.
that really kind of puts things into perspective. I remember one commenter was sharing a story about how they got hit with a $2,500 ambulance bill, and it was just for a short ride.
And that's just one example. When we think about it, the average cost of an emergency room visit can easily be thousands of dollars. And for somebody living on a low wage, you know, a bill like that can just be absolutely devastating. It can really lead to a spiral of debt that's incredibly difficult to get out of.
So it's not even just, getting through each day. It's this constant state of like waiting for the other shoe to drop. I can see how that would be so emotionally draining.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just the financial burden. The emotional toll of poverty is immense. Imagine that constant worry, the lack of sleep, having trouble focusing at work because all you can think about is how you're going to make ends meet. These are costs of poverty
Hmm.
that I think a reality show, even with the best intentions, would struggle to really show.
It makes you wonder if it's even possible to like design a show that could accurately capture all of those nuances. But you know what? The Redditors, they actually had some really creative ideas. They started throwing out all of these twists to try to make the show feel more realistic.
Oh, those suggestions, I find those fascinating because they really show a deep understanding of what a simple salary swap would miss. It's not just about, living on a lower income. It's about experiencing all of the systemic factors
Yeah.
that really drive poverty.
Absolutely. Like one of the most popular suggestions was to have the CEO live with a low wage employee and their family instead of just being by themselves
Yeah.
in some tiny apartment.
Wow, that's interesting.
And I thought that was brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, that adds a whole new layer of complexity, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Suddenly, it's not just about managing your own personal budget. It's about having to navigate, shared resources,
Mm.
family dynamics, the kind of emotional support systems that help people get through tough times.
It would also force them to actually experience things like childcare costs, how difficult transportation can be, the lack of affordable housing in so many communities. These are all things that impact families every single day.
Yeah, and think about the potential for conflict. Imagine a billionaire CEO who is used to privilege and control, suddenly having to adjust to a completely different reality. With a family that's struggling to make ends meet, I think that could be incredibly insightful, both for the CEO and for anyone watching.
I'm already hooked on this imaginary show, but seriously, it raises so many questions like, what are the ethical implications of basically putting a family's life on display for everyone to see? Could this even be done in a way that feels authentic and respectful so it's not just exploiting people?
Those are really important things to consider. And it's a good reminder that even with the most creative format, a reality show is still, at the end of the day, a construct. It's a filtered version of reality,
Yeah.
shaped by the producers, the editors, all the demands of the entertainment industry.
So even if they went all out with these twists like car breakdowns, surprise medical emergencies, debt collectors showing up at the door, it still wouldn't be the full picture, would it?
Exactly. And I think that's really where the limitations of reality TV come in. It can give us a glimpse into a different world, but it can never really fully capture the actual lived experience of poverty.
But even with those limitations, I'm still really intrigued by this whole idea. Like, what if this show actually started a real conversation about wealth inequality, not just among the viewers at home, but among people who can actually make a difference, policymakers?
That's what we hope for, isn't it? That this kind of thought experiment, even if it's presented through the lens of entertainment, that it can help us challenge our assumptions, generate empathy, and ultimately lead to real change.
Makes you wonder, would people even tune in for something like this? I mean, would it be just too real for prime time, too uncomfortable to watch?
That's a good question because we're so used to seeing like wealth and luxury, glorified on TV. It would be a big shift to see the real struggles of poverty, laid bare.
Yeah, it's almost like there's this taboo, You just don't show the realities of what it means to struggle financially.
Yeah, there's definitely this like tendency to kind of clean up poverty and focus on those feel-good stories about people overcoming, incredible odds, but we don't talk about the systemic problems that contribute to it in the first place.
And when you do see poverty on TV, it's often sensationalized, right? Like it's just there for entertainment value.
Exactly. You have those poverty porn shows where viewers are just, invited to watch people who are living in really difficult situations.
It just feels exploitative, Like it's more about shock value than actually trying to understand or have empathy.
Yeah, and it reinforces those harmful stereotypes, the people living in poverty are
Yeah.
lazy or irresponsible, or that they somehow deserve to be in that situation.
Which is so far from the truth. I mean, poverty is often the result of things that are totally out of people's control.
Yeah.
Not having access to good education, affordable housing, healthcare, jobs that pay a living wage.
Right. It's about understanding that there are structural inequalities that are creating these conditions and not blaming individuals for circumstances that are really beyond their control.
That's why I think that twist, having the CEO actually live with the family, it's so smart. It forces them to actually come face to face with these problems.
Imagine, right, the CEO having to take the bus, figure out childcare that they can afford, try to see a doctor when you have a really limited budget. It would be like a crash course in the reality of poverty, something you could never get from just living on less money for a month.
And it would show how all these problems are interconnected. Like one thing going wrong, your car breaks down, suddenly you're missing work, you're losing money, and it just snowballs.
Absolutely. It's understanding those ripple effects, how one small setback can lead to really serious consequences.
But going back to those ethical questions we were talking about, how do you actually make a show like this without, disrespecting the low-wage employee and their family?
That's the big question. It would require a completely different approach to how these reality shows are usually made.
Like,
I think the focus has to shift. It has to be about the experiences of that family, giving them a voice, not just making it about the CEO's journey.
so it's not about turning them into, characters that we watch on TV. It's about giving them a platform to actually share their stories.
Exactly. And it's about giving them control over how they're being portrayed.
Mm.
Their participation has to be voluntary with clear boundaries and protections in place.
What about like compensation, It wouldn't be right to put a family through all of this without making sure they're properly compensated, especially when, the CEO is probably getting paid a ton to be on the show.
Absolutely. Fair compensation is essential, and it should be more than just a one-time payment. It should include ongoing support, resources, real opportunities to help them build a better financial future.
It's about empowerment, not exploitation, right?
Exactly, and it's about making sure the show doesn't just raise awareness, but actually leads to real improvements in their lives.
So it's not just about creating a spectacle, it's about trying to create real change.
And that change needs to go beyond just the people on the show. It needs to address the systemic issues that are causing poverty in the first place.
So it's about using the show's platform to push for better policies, stronger social safety nets, more economic justice for everyone.
Exactly. It's about moving from entertainment to action. Using this show as a way to start a larger conversation about how we can actually make things better.
It's a big goal, but I think it's worth trying, even if this show never actually gets made. The fact that we're even talking about it, questioning the way things are and imagining how they could be different, that's a step in the right direction, right?
Absolutely. It's about changing the narrative, challenging the status quo, and demanding better for ourselves and everyone else.
It's funny. We've been poking holes in this whole idea of the show, but
Yeah.
I got to say a part of me is actually kind of excited about the idea of it actually happening.
Yeah, I get that. It's hard to deny. There's something really interesting about forcing a billionaire to see what it's actually like to live with very little, you know?
Like, what if this show actually, did some good? Like, what if it changed how people view poverty, challenged their assumptions, maybe even spark some kind of movement for economic justice?
That's a powerful thought. And it's not totally impossible. Think about the impact some shows have had, like Cosmos or Planet Earth. They really raised awareness about science and the environment.
Oh, totally. And they did it in a way that was like engaging. They made these really complicated topics easy to understand, easy for people to get into, and they got people talking, they got them doing things. They even, had an effect on policy decisions.
Exactly. And I think if you made a show about poverty the right way, it could have a similar impact. It
Yeah.
really all comes down to how it's done.
It would have to be done carefully, really sensitive to the issues and committed to telling real authentic stories.
Absolutely. And it can't just be about showing people struggling. It has to connect those individual stories to the bigger systemic problems that are going on.
So it's not just about watching some CEO figure out how to pay their bills. It's about helping people understand why poverty exists in the first place and what we can actually do to fix it.
Right. It's about giving viewers the knowledge and the motivation to become advocates for change, to demand better for their communities and for themselves.
I remember one comment on that Reddit thread. It really stuck with me. Somebody said that the show should have a call to action at the end of every episode. Tell
Mhm.
people to get involved with local organizations that are fighting poverty.
I love that idea. It's about turning watching into doing, turning that feeling of empathy into action.
And it's about recognizing that we all have a responsibility to create a society that's more just, where everyone has a real chance to succeed.
Couldn't agree more. And maybe this whole thing, this Reddit thread, this idea for a show, maybe it can be the start of those really important conversations, those actions that need to happen.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting deep dive, thinking about wealth, thinking about poverty, and how the media really shapes how we understand these things. So
We hope this has, sparked some thoughts, some questions, maybe even inspired you to get out there and make a difference. This has been the deep dive, and we'll catch you next time.